As an ambitious woman, you might wonder, how do I secure my seat at the table? And for many existing and aspiring leaders, having a seat at the table is a form of success, right? But with so much competition and the boardroom still being male dominated, how do you ensure that you stand out from the crowd? Our standout guest today, Deborah Rosati, is a steadfast champion of corporate governance, ESG, sustainability, and board diversity. During our conversation, she's going to share her own experience getting on boards and how she helps other women secure a seat at the table. So please help me welcome Deborah to the Stand Up podcast. Welcome, Deborah. I like to start the interview by asking this question to all the guests. If I were to ask your loved ones 3 words to describe yourself, what would they say?
Whoa, that's a good one. I would say courageous, confident, and curious.
Curious. I like that one. And I noticed actually most of the women leaders I have interviewed on the podcast, curious was one of them. So you said courageous. Why? Can you give us an example of something that happened in your life and people realize that, wow, she's daring.
Thank you. I would say courage. And an example that I can cite is I had been appointed to be a chair of a board. It was a not-for-profit. And it was quite clear that the founder CEO needed to be replaced. And the previous chair, he was his good friend, so was not making that change. So when I stepped into that role, I had to have the courage to do the right thing. And that was a pretty very lonely place to be making that. You're making a decision as a whole from a board, but I had to have the courage to do the right thing. I didn't have, I wasn't looking for best friends. I was looking to do the right thing. So that would be an example of courage.
And we're gonna talk a little bit about it later. Um, let's take a look at your early influences then. Can you share a story from your childhood or early life that had a significant impact on your decision to pursue a leader or to simply become a leader?
That's a great question. I always like to answer it with, I wanted to be a businessman just like my father.
Okay.
I saw my dad. He was a Dutch immigrant that came from Canada, that came from Holland at 14, and he was really a self-made man. And I really was inspired by his courage, his resilience, his fortitude, and really his persistence. Just keep showing up and doing well. And so that really inspired me from a childhood age.
So would you be that he was a role model for
Oh,
you?
he was my role model. Yes, yes.
Yes. Did you have any other role models?
Well, I think my mother as well. My mother was an immigrant from Scotland and came to Canada. And so the sense of independence and doing
Mhm.
your best always. So I think I had two really great role models, both in my mother and my father from a young age. And also the support to say, go be your best and you're gonna evolve, get your education, do well. And they were just really, really supportive. So very
And
grateful.
it tells us a lot about the environment you are raised in and you grow in, because when I talk to women, oftentimes we share that common a story where we were told to be quiet, to behave, to and oftentimes then when I hear the stories from other women leaders like yours, like, yeah, but I was in an environment where I was encouraged to do, to try, to learn, and it makes difference then when you become an adult, and then when you start your professional life, even in the ambitions that you set up for yourself. I do believe it make a big difference in the way you approach things.
Yeah, and I think influential at a young age. I had an older brother who was 2 years older than me. And I never thought because I was a girl I couldn't do. I just was like, I'm a person. I have talents, I have skills, and I was really just encouraged to follow my heart and do my best. And having an older brother helped that courageous part of me as well.
I'm sure it did. And so we have a great question here from Yanis who says, Deborah, why female leaders have to be courageous and male leaders have to be fearless? What's the difference, if there is any difference?
That's a great question, Yanis. I would say a lot of times I say I'm fearless. And fearless to me is that you have no bounds, that you're not thinking, you're not fearful of things. So you'll take on initiatives, you'll take on projects. But I think courageous is more having the courage to do something. So maybe courage gives you the ability to be fearless. So I don't know. Sometimes I use them one and the same. I don't really feel like courageous is an attribute specific to female leaders, and fearless is to male leaders. I think it comes from the individual themselves, and I think you can be fearless and you can also be courageous.
Yeah, you can definitely be both, despite your gender. I don't believe it is gender related, right?
Agreed.
Um, Now let's take a look at your personal growth. So we know you were raised in an environment that cultivated that characters from that the characters that you have developed. So can you share with us some of the challenges or maybe a setback that you faced in your life? So that can be in your personal life, that can be in your professional life, and how did you overcome it?
Great question. I like to think as you begin your journey in life, there are three chapters in your life, and we'll talk about preparing for your life's work. And my preparing for my life's work was articling as a CA, a CPA student, because I was getting ready for my life's work. And in that journey, and this is 40, well, just not quite 40 years ago, but close to 40 years ago, I was articling with an accounting firm, and I was in a co-op accounting program at Brock University. And I had a senior partner tell me that I would never be a CPA. That was a pretty defining moment, but I had great support around me, as I had mentioned. And I didn't discount his comment, but I didn't let that define me. And I went on and did my studies and wrote my exams, and I became a CPA. So what I would say from that story is don't let anyone define you just because maybe he didn't like me. I was the only woman in the office. It was all males. I did my work. I worked really hard. I kept showing up, and I did become a CPA. But if didn't have that supportive environment around me, I might not have been able to persevere and move beyond that. So I think that was for me, it was a story of really don't let anyone define you.
Yeah, I like to say the people you surround yourself with can make you or break you. And it sounds cliche, but this is very true because success is not a solo endeavor. And I know, especially for us, women high achievers, and for high achievers in general, we feel like, okay, we are smart, we can figure it out. We will figure it out. And eventually we do. But what is the cost that we pay for it? And how long did it take us to figure it out? And when by doing it by yourself, right? When actually you surround yourself with the right people, you create a support system. It makes a big difference because it can fast track your success. It can also show you the shortcut to success. It doesn't mean that it will be easy. It doesn't mean that you will never fail and learn. It means that you will avoid to do the mistakes that others have done before you. But the people you surround yourself with are critical to your personal and professional growth. And my question to you is, because I feel this is not something that we teach us in school, right? Networking, right? It's about work hard, your hard work will pay off, do this, it will pay off, keep your head down, it will pay off. But no one tells us that, okay, the earlier you start being strategic when it comes to networking, the stronger your support system will be. So when did you realize, at what point in your career, or maybe when you were in university, did you realize that, okay, I gotta build a strong support system, I gotta network strategically because this will help me go ahead and move forward in my career?
That's when I think about networking. I would say how I would define networking is that it has to be reciprocal. Okay. So it
Mhm.
cannot be a one way take, take, take. And
Yes.
I've done a blog, and one of the statements I make is to give generously and receive graciously. So, as you are building your relationships over time, you need to cultivate and you need to feed those relationships. So they can't just be transactional. You have to build those relationships over time. And I think at a very young age, my how I got into my first articling job was my dad had a network. He had two senior partners he knew. It was like, can you make some introductions? And I knew how valuable that was. And so people opening the door for me, I equally want to open the door for others. So that networking is, I think there's a term they say, for women is send the elevator down so the other women can come up. And I think you have to be very strategic, as you said, on who you send the elevator down for. But
Yes.
because you got to the top doesn't mean you stay there. I think you need to be cultivating and empowering and amplifying other women's voices along the way.
There is I did a poll a couple of weeks ago on my LinkedIn profile, and I asked the question to know, what do you think is stopping women from getting into leadership roles um, from a personal perspective. So the I had a couple of answers, like family and professional balance, lack of competence or slash experience, or lack of self confidence slash imposter syndrome. And there is this perception, and actually, I'm using the word perception on purpose because there are studies that have shown that actually this is not quite the case, but there is still this perception that we do believe as a society and as women that it will be so challenging, to balance personal and professional life that some of us decide to not pursue leadership, because they want to, because of their own priorities, and family can be their priority, right? For others, the career can be the priority, and for some others, they want to be able to find that balance. So how were you able, if you did, and if so, how? How are you able to find that balance between personal and professional life while maintaining your leadership status?
I think as women, we have many demands and different commitments on, and I think you have to be really clear on what your priorities are. And I always say you have stages and ages in your career. So, as a young financial executive, I had two young sons, and they knew their mother worked. They knew that I was a businesswoman. They knew I went to work every day, but they were in good care, they were in good schools, and yes, I would pick them up after school, usually daycare after school. But what was important is I knew that I had a professional career. And it didn't mean that I had to stop being a professional when I had two kids. I think what you need to understand as a woman is you can't be a superwoman for everything. So there's a word called outsourcing. So I didn't clean my house. I had, outsourced. I was in a place, I was a professional. I had caregivers. I had support where I could, but I also wanted to raise my two sons. I didn't go on not for profit boards. I had my full time executive role. I had my two sons. I did not give back to the community at that stage in my life because I just didn't have that. But as they got older and as I evolved in my career, I was able to give back. So I think what's important is to know what stage you're at and
Mhm.
age you're at because it varies over time.
It does, and your priority changes over time, right? I love that. You can be all that you want, but not at the same time.
Time.
You have to be able to identify what stage you are in. And I believe this is the best recipe to avoid exhaustion and burnout.
Absolutely. And I think as women, we have to learn to say no. So the big N-O, N-N-O.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you don't like the N or the O, but you have to be able to say no.
Yes. So now let's take today's topic is about, how do I secure a seat at the table? Study after study shows that diverse boards mean better business, right? For all stakeholders, for everyone. Yet, we are far from where we want to be. A McKinsey report from 2020 revealed that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on their boards were 25% likely to deliver above average profitability than others, right? So to summarize, the more your board is diverse, the more you are profitable. Still, in public company boardrooms, women represent less than a third of directors. And among the most heavily funded, high growth private companies, 40% have all male board, and 78%, let me say it again, 78% don't include a single woman of color, right? So, despite increased attention, and we know we have been talking a lot, and you do a great work. We're going to talk about the work that you do with your organization, and so despite all those efforts on closing the boardroom gender gap, progress has obviously been slow. So, my first question is, what is your thought on this current state of things?
Well, your data's right. You did your research. Thank you. And I would add one other data point. Osler's every year, which is a law firm here in Canada, they do a diversity disclosure practice, and they started doing the disclosure and the data in 2015 when the Ontario Securities Commission came out with this comply and explain for publicly listed companies. And when they started tracking the data, only 12% were on total collective TSX listed companies. And then last year, when they do the proxy disclosures and they gather the data, it was at 26%. So that's still below the third that you were referring to.
Yeah.
And there are industries like mining and technology where maybe it's 10, maybe it's 12, or it's below that. And some of them don't even have women on the board. So just to give you some ranges. And then for TSX listed companies, the composite 60, they're at about a third of. But then when you get into I was reading a Harvard Business Review article recently, and they said, don't use underrepresented, use underrecognized. So underrecognized groups, the numbers are smaller. So we all need to do better. There's an awareness. So that really came from having served on boards for 15 years. I decided it was time. I was usually the only woman, and predominantly in the tech sector, around the boardroom table. And so I decided to create my own social purpose company, which is Women Get on Board. And the mission is to connect, promote, and empower women to corporate boards. We have over 850 members across the country. And really, my one aim or one goal is to get one more woman on a board, one board at a time. And you got to keep showing up. You got to empower through education, make connections, promoting those women that get and helping each other, right? Lifting each other up. It's when, I like to reverse it and say if 80% of boards are made up of men, give or take, that means 20%, give or take, are women. You've got to build the networks. You have to extend the networks. And, we're not all going to look the same. We need to be diverse of thought, of age, of ethnicity, race, gender. That's what makes valuable. You were using the data saying, companies that are more diverse are more profitable. That's good governance.
That's good governance. And just to ensure I got it right, you said you don't look for underrepresented groups, but unrecognized groups. So what's the difference?
Reading the articles, like when you say you're underrepresented, already you're putting a negative tone to it. You're saying you're underrepresented, so you become more of a representative versus underrecognized. You're not being recognized for the contribution. So you can be recognized for your skill, your expertise, your age, your gender. It just puts a different light on it, right? It's about, not trying to reach out to the underrepresented, but reach out to those that are underrecognized. That can come in so many different places. It just has more of a positive, affirmative way of looking at it versus turning it around and saying, oh, you're underrepresented. We need to get you on our board. How do you feel if you're like, hey, I'm the underrepresented on the board?
True. I had never heard of it before, and I had never thought about it this way, but it's true that the words that we use make a big impact in the way we communicate and the way we perceive ourselves and the way people perceive us, right? So using unrecognized, being part of an unrecognized group is way more positive. Agree, 100%. Love it. So based on your own experience and of course based on all the work that you are doing supporting the members of your organization, what's preventing in a practical way, what's preventing more women from accessing the boardroom?
I've got a couple. I have a
I'm
couple
sure you
thoughts,
do.
and it's not research based. It's just actually seeing it. Is you need to have renewal mechanisms, and what I mean by that is board members need to come off the board. Renewal happens when you bring new board members in, and when you don't have an age limit or a term limit, there's nothing. There's no mechanism in place to create that renewal. Now, mind you, public sector, so um, Crown Corps have term limits, not for profits have term limits. And so I think it is just good governance to be able to say, if somebody's been on the board for 15 or 20 years, their independence is somewhat impaired. And so there's a time where you've got to start thinking about that renewal. So if there's no mechanism to renew, then it's really difficult to bring in, you know, under recognized groups onto the board or diverse individuals into the board, because you've got to open up those. And also networking. If 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 a lot of the boards, your buddy, the person from golf, them from your ski club, and it becomes very small. You have to broaden out, and that's what we've really tried to do with Women Get on Board, is to be a broader network of very accomplished women corporate directors and aspiring women corporate directors. They may not have the network, and what we're trying to do is build a community to support and really build the pipeline of the next generation of women corporate directors.
I was wondering if implementing the famous quota would be the solution, but I feel like, setting terms, like fixed terms, so we can allow that renewal to happen is way a better option. So, but still, what do you think about the famous quota? Would that help,
Well,
really?
European countries, France and Spain and Finland and Norway, a lot of European countries implemented a 40% quota years ago. Okay, so it's not new. In Canada, they took a softer approach saying comply or explain, but there's no quotas, there's no hard deadlines or forced renewals. So I think that if there are some mechanisms for renewal, and term limits and age limits are one. A lot of people go, well, you've got to watch out for continuity if you have too many people. Well, you plan it out. It's called succession, right? And so
Yeah.
I'm not, you could have a really great board member that might be getting to the age limit and you still want to continue them in that board role. Great. But you've got to plan for renewal and succession, and having those difficult conversations, having board evaluations and evaluating your board's performance. And maybe it's time for change, right? And having the courage to have those conversations with board members that aren't performing, and opening the spot for somebody else to come in. Those are difficult conversations, but if you really look at it, and we also, organizations, companies grow and they evolve, and what skill you had 10 years ago may not be the same skill that the company needs today. That's why you need these board skill matrix to assess what skills you need, what you have today, and what you need going forward.
Last week guest actually, the topic was about how to break the mold and bring more diversity within an organization. And she talked about the fact that having those conversations, as you said, it's difficult, it's challenging, but oftentimes those decision makers, they are not open to having those conversations. So what do you do? How do you keep like progressing towards more diversity when actually you are facing people who are not willing to have that conversation. And the second part of that question, actually, which is related, and Yanis, I see your question here. I think it's a very interesting question. When I was asking, what's preventing more women to get on board, and he's asking if it's male prejudice, but I will add to that, would you say that there is a conscious resistance, right, to opening the boardroom to women or to more diverse individuals?
I think it has to be a mindset. And there's a term called, there's a book by Hella Bank Jorgensen called Stewards of the Future. And if we all know we have, you know, an open mindset and good governance, you want to do the right thing. And it's not about you, it's about doing the right thing for that company and its stakeholders. And so I would say, in my particular case, if it was just predominantly male prejudice, I would have never gone in any boards. I think there was the door opening to say, yes, Deborah has these skills. I think she'd be great. And I usually evolved and I ended up taking on leadership roles, chairing audit committees, nominating corporate governance committees, special committees. So if there was male prejudice, I would have never had that opportunity. I just think there has to be more of an awareness that we already know the data says better performance. So I think they just need to find those women that can bring those skills. So I think the male prejudice, I really wouldn't pin it on that. I think there
Mhm.
has to be a broader mindset. And I think as more women go into leadership roles on boards, i.e., less than 5% of TSX listed companies have female chairs of boards, they have impact, they have influence. We need to get those numbers higher and more women chairing, nominating corporate governance committees to help with that nomination process. So I think it's the whole system and the process, not a prejudice.
And I'm glad this question is coming from a man, because there are a lot of men out there, trying to increase awareness, to better understand, to be strong allies and better allies for women, So thank you, Yanis, for being part of this conversation. And Erin here has joined us, and she says, I think it's more of an unconscious bias about having women leading. So more unconscious bias than a conscious decision, a conscious resistance.
Well
Yeah.
said. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of studies, but I think it's how you show up and you open the door. And it's not only there's a term, it's I like to think of the term that's being, out there, EDI and B. So equity, you've got to have equity first before you can have diversity. You have diversity, you have to be inclusive, but not only do you have to be inclusive, somebody has to have the sense of belonging, right? So you can open the door, you can be diverse, but if you don't that individual who is diverse isn't feeling belonging, it's really hard to have a seat at the table.
Exactly. And actually, this is the perfect transition for my next question. Having a seat at the table is just the first step, because then you want to be able to use your influence around, high stakes decisions. How do you ensure that your voice is heard, basically, and taken into, and most importantly, taken into consideration? So, in a recent article in the Harvard Business Review, I came across the term warmth competence. So, basically, which is walking the fine line between expressing competence and warmth on corporate boards. And as everything in life, I want to say, but more when it comes to high level roles and decision making roles, there is a double standard, a gender standard on what is expected from a woman in leadership versus what is expected from a man in leadership. And so the challenges with being a board member is, boards, they don't meet often. So you don't have that many opportunities to showcase your competence, your expertise, and to have this, to express that influence. And so you must ensure that you speak up. You must ensure that you use your voice strategically, in a smart way, if I can say so. But you want to ensure that you engage in specific participation tactics to optimally navigate the gender based expectations. I found it fascinating. And I discovered that term while I was doing my research for this interview. So, my question to you is, how do we ensure, once we have that seat secured at the table, that in the short span of time that we have, basically, we engage in specific participation tactics to optimally navigate and have a weight in the decision making process, because this is what we want at the end of the day.
Well, you must have read my blog. I have a blog that says "Finding Your Voice in the Boardroom," and
Okay,
I like to
I
attribute
haven't,
it.
but I will
But
definitely.
and I really attribute it to 4 P's. The first one is your purpose. So if your purpose of the why you're showing up and what you're doing is really, really strong, you can have it helps you find your voice, right? Because you're there for a reason and it's your why. And then you've got passion and you show up and you have passion because you care about the company, you care about the cause, and that helps you find your voice. And not only if you have your purpose, your passion, you've got presence. And there's a lot of different ways to find your presence. And one thing I always say is there's 3 elements to a board meeting. There's the pre-meeting. So you might see materials, you might have concerns. You can have a voice before even the board meeting starts. There's the board meeting, so finding your voice, finding the time to speak, being very strategic. And sometimes maybe your voice is after the meeting because you've gone away and you thought about it. So you can have that voice and that presence before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. And I think you can be very strategic in how you show up from your presence. And the last one is your power, which I think we've talked about, which is your ability to influence. And I think if you've got the courage, you have the knowledge, you have the experience, you've got sponsorship, you can lean in on certain situations. So to me, those 4 P's, your purpose, your passion, your presence, and your power, can really help you find your voice.
And I love that you sing, don't wait until you get that seat. You do it before, during, and after. So, you're building a momentum, basically.
Absolutely.
And so Deborah was kind enough actually to provide us with a code. So please scan the QR code that you see here and use the code WGOB100 for a complimentary download. So there are, I believe, 2 e-guides that are available on the website. So once you scan the QR code, you will have access to those e-guides. You can download it for free using the code, and so that will give you more practical steps. It's more like a guideline, if I can say so, on what you could do. You could start doing or implementing in order to amplify your voice before getting that seat, and then getting that seat on the board. So would you like to give us a word of two about what each guide can help us to achieve?
Thank you. So the first one you've got on screen, how to get yourself on a board, is really the foundational of, what is it to be a board member, what your roles, responsibilities, the different types of boards, public sector, not-for-profit, regional, national, private versus public. And then how do you position your skill set? Like what's your board value proposition? How do you prepare a board resume? How do you network your way on a board, and how to prepare for board interviews? So that's sort of how to get yourself on a board. And then once you're on the board, the second ebook is about elevating your board effectiveness. And we talked, right, the first element is finding your voice, and we've talked about the 4 P's. Then there's using your emotional intelligence, which I think you were referring to, like your warmth competence, right?
Mhm.
That's your EQ, your empathy, your awareness. And then how do you elevate your board leadership? So the third one is really about, once you're there, how can you be more effective?
Okay, so you should be downloading one of those e-guides at each step of the process. I love it. Very practical, and that's what we love here on this podcast. We have a comment here from Erin, who says, let me put it on the screen. And let me take this up for this. Board management dynamics are changing. We now have a constantly evolving system, and the level of board engagement is increasing as we have automation at the heart of modern governance. And every document is generated and accessible. And I cannot read your full comment here.
Without physical meetings. That was the last
Without,
bit of it.
without having physical meetings. Thank you. What do you think about it?
Well, and I think it was Aaron that asked, as you know, most boards have what they call a board portal. So all the information is automated. You can access it, download it, and it's all conveniently there. And as you know, we've been doing virtual meetings. And so, but you're getting 300, 400, 500 pages downloaded into the portal that you go on. And it's difficult to get through all of that. And so, but you have to be prepared. You have to go through those documents. But like I said, if there's something in the package that you get and you've got question about it, have the conversation before, because maybe other board members are thinking about it. One of the best practices that I've seen out there is that the board has an in-camera, which means in-camera is the board members are meeting without management, and it's before the meeting. And so you've come together, you're only meeting once a quarter. You come together before the meeting and you talk about issues, concerns, and then you bring the CEO in. So it's kind of a pre-meeting before the meeting. And I find that really helps align where you are and what some of the decisions that have to be made. So I think there's no one right way to run a meeting. And I think there's a lot of really good practices out there.
Okay, so for the woman listening here, watching us, who would like to step up and get into a board, what is the best way they can get in touch with you and with the organization?
Thank you. So you can go to womengetonboard.ca. You can go to Deborah Rosati, my LinkedIn. So you can follow me on LinkedIn, and you can do connect@womengetonboard.ca. Or follow us on LinkedIn as well. So happy to hear from you, and thank you for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And again, don't forget to scan the QR code here for a complimentary download, so you know what to do exactly along the way. You don't have to do it alone. That's the thing here. You don't have to do it alone. We are having those conversations to inspire you. Deborah, with her organization, is here, to provide you the practicality and the support system that you need in order to secure that seat at the table. So don't believe you have to do it on your own. There are people here and organizations out there to help you and make it happen. So do not hesitate to reach out. So thank you everyone for watching us today and listening to this podcast. Thank you, Deborah, again for being with us today. And I will see you next week for another live episode of Stand Out from the Crowd. Thank you, everyone. You take care and you stay safe. Bye bye.